The fluorescent lights of the midnight diner hummed like a low-grade migraine, casting a sickly, flickering yellow pallor over everything I touched. It was 3 a.m., the witching hour for the lost, the broken, and those of us too poor to sleep. The air inside was a heavy, stagnant soup of stale grease, burnt coffee grounds, and the kind of hollow desperation that clings to the walls of a place that never closes. I was on my hands and knees, my back screaming in protest as I scrubbed at a stubborn grease stain near the corner booth. It was a stain that had likely been there longer than I'd been alive, a permanent scar on the linoleum, much like the life I was leaden with. Then, the bell chimed, a lonely, thin sound, and I saw her. She was a tiny, fragile figure in a silk blue dress that probably cost more than my entire apartment building. Her dark, matted curls fell over her face as her shoulders shook with violent, silent sobs. She looked like a porcelain doll dropped into a gutter. Outside, through the rain-streaked window, a matte black sedan sat idling at the curb, its engine a low, predatory growl. It had no license plate. Its dimmed headlights cut through the darkness, like the eyes of a wolf waiting for the right moment to tear into its prey. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, uneven rhythm of pure instinct. I dropped my rag and knelt beside her, the cold tile biting into my skin through my thin uniform. "Where is your daddy, sweetheart?" I whispered. She didn't look up. She just gripped a tattered teddy bear as if it were the only thing keeping her from floating away into the night. Little did I know, answering that question would put a target on my back that I could never wash off. Before we go further, I have to ask, if you saw a child alone with a suspicious car waiting outside, would you mind your own business to stay safe, or would you risk everything to help? Tell me in the comments. I need to know if I was brave or just heartless. My hands were shaking before the girl even walked through the door. 10 minutes earlier, I'd been out back by the dumpsters when Miller cornered me. Miller was a debt collector, the kind of man who used words like investment while he calculated which of your bones were easiest to break. He didn't need to shout to be terrifying. He just leaned in close, the cloying smell of cheap tobacco and peppermint heavy on his breath. "Your mother's medical bills aren't going away, Elena," he'd hissed, his voice as smooth and cold as a razor blade. The interest just doubled again. "My boss is losing his patience with your hardship stories. Pay the full amount by Friday, or we stop being polite and start being thorough." I was drowning. Every single cent I scraped together from double shifts and meager tips went into a ceramic jar hidden under a loose floorboard in my kitchen. It was all for chemotherapy treatments that seemed to be doing nothing but making my mother look more like a ghost with every passing day. I walked back into the diner, leaning heavily against the counter, trying to blink away the hot, stinging tears of total frustration. I was at my absolute breaking point, the kind of exhaustion that settles in your marrow. I just wanted one night where I didn't have to be a hero, a provider, or a target for thugs. I just wanted to be invisible. But the universe has a cruel sense of timing. The little girl in the expensive lace dress looked like a lost princess who had accidentally wandered into a graveyard. Her presence felt like a lightning strike in the middle of my misery. I could have looked away. I should have looked away. I knew that in this city, getting involved in someone else's drama was a quick way to end up in a landfill. But looking at her felt like looking at a mirror of my own helplessness. I realized that if I didn't step up, nobody would. I wiped my eyes on my sleeve, forced a breath into my lungs, and walked toward the corner booth. My life was already falling apart. What was one more risk? The girl looked to be about 6 years old, her expensive silk dress torn at the hem and splattered with mud. "Hey," I said softly, my voice cracking as I slid into the vinyl booth across from her. I kept my movements slow and deliberate, the way you approach a wounded animal that might bolt or bite. "I'm Elena. You look like you're having a rough night, and trust me, kiddo, I know exactly how that feels. This place isn't much, but it's warm, and the coffee, well, the coffee is terrible, but the pie is okay." She finally looked up, her eyes wide and red-rimmed with a level of raw terror that no child should ever possess. "Daddy was shouting," she sobbed, her voice barely a whisper over the hum of the industrial refrigerator. "He was on the phone in the front seat. He was so angry. He said he had to eliminate the problem so we could finally go home. I got scared. I thought he was talking about me because I spilled my juice. She sniffled, wiping her nose with the back of a small, trembling hand. I jumped out when the car stopped at the red light and ran until I found the lights of this place. My blood turned to ice in my veins. Eliminate the problem. My gut screamed at me to pick up the wall-mounted phone and call the police, but I hesitated. In this neighborhood, the police were often just another wing of the gangs, and if her father was the kind of man who eliminated problems, he probably owned the precinct. If I called them, I might just be handing her back to her executioner. I stood up, walked to the display case with shaky legs, and grabbed the largest, most decadent slice of cherry pie we had. I set it in front of her with a forced, reassuring smile. On the house, I said, sliding a silver fork toward her. Pie doesn't fix the world's problems, Sophia, but it's a start.
Talk to me.
I'm listening, and I'm not going anywhere until you feel safe. As she took a shaky, uncertain bite, the red filling staining her lips like blood, I glanced back at the window. The black sedan was still there, sitting in the rain like a gargoyle. It hadn't moved an inch. I realized then that I wasn't just a waitress anymore. I was the only thing standing between this child and whatever darkness was waiting in that car. I'm putting my life on the line here. If you're enjoying Elena's journey, hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss the moment the boss walks in. What would you do with that pie? Eat it or run? Let me know below. The cherry filling was a deep, bruised red against the white porcelain plate, a stark contrast to the pale, trembling hands of the girl eating it. Sophia ate slowly, her eyes darting toward the door every time the wind rattled the metal frame or the rain intensified. I sat there, leaning my chin on my hand, trying to look like the most relaxed person in the world while my internal organs were twisting into knots. I needed her to talk. I needed to understand the gravity of the situation before the door opened again. My daddy is a ghost, she whispered suddenly, setting her fork down with a tiny clink. I frowned, leaning in. A ghost. She nodded solemnly, her eyes dark and hollow. That's what the men in the suits call him when they think I'm asleep. They say he's everywhere, but nobody sees him until it's too late. He doesn't like it when I cry. He says tears are for the weak, and the Volkovs are never weak. The name Volkov hit me like a physical punch to the stomach. Every soul in this city knew that name. Viktor Volkov wasn't just a businessman. He was the shadow that owned the docks, the warehouses, and the very air we breathed. He was the ghost, a man whose reputation was built on silence and sudden, absolute violence. I felt a cold sweat break out across my neck. I was sitting 3 feet away from the daughter of a man who could make me, my mother, and this entire diner vanish with a single text message. Sophia, I said, my voice barely holding steady. Does your daddy know you're here? She shook her head, her curls bouncing. He was too busy. He was shouting at a man on the floor of the office. There was red on the carpet, like the pie. She started to cry again, silent fat tears that tracked through the dried salt on her cheeks. My heart broke, overriding my survival instinct. In that moment, I didn't care if her father was the devil himself. She was just a little girl who had seen the monster behind the mask. I reached across the table and took her hand. It was ice cold, like marble. You're safe here. I lied, my voice firm. I won't let anyone take you unless you want to go. I looked back at the idling black car, and for the first time, it didn't just look like a predator. It looked like the mouth of hell, waiting to swallow us both. The heavy, oppressive silence of the night was shattered by the screech of rubber on wet asphalt. It wasn't just the one black sedan anymore. 2 more massive, armored SUVs roared into the parking lot, positioning themselves with tactical precision to box in the diner's only entrance. My breath hitched, and for a second, I forgot how to exhale. I stood up, my knees knocking together, and grabbed Sophia by the shoulders. I pulled her behind the heavy wooden counter, tucking her into the narrow space by the industrial dishwasher. Stay down, I hissed, my heart hammering in my ears. Don't make a sound, Sophia. No matter what you hear, you stay hidden. The diner's bell didn't just chime this time. The door was kicked open with such force that the glass rattled in its frame. The cold, biting rain blew inside, misting the air and bringing the smell of the city's exhaust with it. 5 men in heavy wool overcoats stepped in first. They didn't look like street thugs. They looked like professionals. Their hands were tucked ominously inside their jackets, and their eyes were cold, scanning the room for threats. They moved with a chilling, synchronized efficiency, checking the bathrooms and the kitchen storage in seconds. Then the man from the sedan stepped inside. Viktor Volkov didn't look like the monster from the stories. He looked like an aristocrat. He was tall, dressed in a charcoal suit that fit him like armor, with silvering hair at his temples and eyes that looked like they were carved from polished flint. He didn't look angry. He looked hollowed out by a terrifying, focused intensity. He didn't glance at the menu or the faded decor. His eyes swept the room until they locked onto me. I was standing behind the registers, my knuckles white as I gripped the edge of the Formica counter. The air in the room seemed to be sucked out, replaced by the vacuum of his presence. "Where is she?" he asked. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried the absolute weight of a death warrant. We've just hit the point of no return. Elena is standing between a mafia kingpin and his daughter. Do you think Viktor is going to be grateful, or is he going to see Elena as a witness who knows too much? Drop a Team Elena or Team Viktor in the comments. And if you're sweating as much as I am, hit that like button and subscribe. Viktor took a slow, measured step forward, his polished Italian shoes clicking rhythmically on the linoleum. The sound was like the ticking of a countdown clock. One of his men moved to the side, cutting off my only exit to the kitchen. I felt Sophia's small, hot hand grab the hem of my apron, her tiny frame shivering against the back of my legs. My every instinct screamed at me to move, to point her out, to beg for my life and tell him I was just doing my job. But then I pictured Miller's face. I pictured the way men like this thought they could own the world just because they were willing to be cruel. "I asked you a question, girl," Viktor said, stopping just 3 feet from the counter. The scent of expensive cologne and rain rolled off him. He reached into his coat, and my heart stopped. I was certain he was pulling a silenced pistol to end me right there. Instead, he pulled out a gold lighter, flicking it open with a sharp, metallic snick. I have had a very long, very difficult night. I do not have the patience for games. Give me my daughter. I didn't move. I don't know where the courage came from. Maybe it was just the sheer exhaustion of being pushed around for too long by life. "She's terrified of you," I said. The words came out louder and clearer than I expected. The men in the suits froze, their hands tensing. Nobody spoke to Viktor Volkov that way and lived to tell the story. His eyes narrowed, the flint in them turning into a cold, blue fire. "What did you say to me?" "I said she's terrified," I repeated, leaning over the counter. So I was eye to eye with the most dangerous man in the city. "She jumped out of a moving car because you were eliminating problems loud enough for a child to hear. She's 6 years old, Mr. Volkov. She doesn't need a ghost or a boss. She needs a father who doesn't scare her into running into a dark diner at 3 in the morning. I could hear the men behind him drawing their breaths in unison. I was a dead woman. I knew it. I could feel the cold kiss of a bullet already. But if I was going to die, I was going to die standing up for someone who couldn't stand up for themselves. Chapter 6, The Shield. Viktor didn't move for what felt like an eternity. The small flame on his lighter flickered in the draft from the open door, casting long, dancing shadows across his face. He looked at me, truly looked at me, not as a nameless waitress, but as a person who had just slapped him in the face with the truth. For a moment, the ghost vanished, and I saw a man who realized he had lost the only thing that actually mattered. Then, his gaze dropped to the floor behind the counter where a tiny sliver of Sophia's blue dress was visible. "Sophia," he said, his voice dropping an octave. It wasn't a command. It was a plea, cracked and desperate. "Sophia, please. Come out." The silence stretched, thick and agonizing. Slowly, Sophia let go of my apron. I felt the loss of her weight against my legs as she stepped out from behind the safety of the counter. She didn't run to him. She walked slowly, her head down, stopping a few feet away from his outstretched hand. "Are you going to hurt the nice lady, Daddy?" she asked, her voice trembling like a leaf in a storm. "She gave me pie. She said I was safe." Viktor looked at me, then back at his daughter. He did something I never expected. He knelt. Right there on the dirty, grease-stained diner floor, his $1,000 suit dragging in the spilled sugar and grime. He didn't care. "No, Princessa," Viktor whispered, his voice thick. "I am not going to hurt her. She is the only person in this city who treated you the way you deserve." He pulled her into a fierce hug, burying his face in her curls. For a second, the monster was gone. But when he stood up, the mask was back on, harder and colder than before. He looked at his men. "Wait in the cars," he commanded. They vanished instantly, slipping back into the rain. He turned his attention back to me, reaching into his pocket once more. This time, he pulled out a leather-bound wallet. The tension is at a breaking point. Viktor is reaching for his wallet. Is this a reward or a clean-up fee for her silence? What would you do if a mafia boss was staring you down like this? Let me know in the comments. Like and subscribe. Viktor didn't pull out a stack of blood-stained bills as I had expected. Instead, he pulled out a small, heavy coin made of matte black metal with a gold wolf embossed on the center. He didn't hand it to me. He placed it firmly on the counter between us. "Money is fleeting, Elena," he said, his voice regaining that terrifying, calm authority that made my skin crawl. "In this city, cash is just paper. But debt is the only currency that never devalues. You protected what is mine when I was too blind to do it myself. Now you are under my protection. If anyone ever makes you feel the way you felt tonight, helpless, you show them this." I stared at the coin. It seemed to swallow the light around it. It felt heavy, not just in physical weight, but in the spiritual cost of what it represented. I thought about Miller and his threats. I thought about the hospital administrators who treated my mother like a line item on a budget. "I didn't do it for a reward, Mr. Volkov," I whispered, though my fingers instinctively hovered over the cool, dark metal. "I did it because she was a little girl who was crying alone in the dark. Anyone would have done it." Viktor's expression softened for a fraction of a second, the closest thing to a human smile I'd seen on him. "No, Elena. Most people would have called the police or looked the other way to save their own skin. That is why you are still alive to have this conversation." He turned to Sophia, who was clinging to his hand, her small face looking weary but finally at peace. "Come, Sophia. We have stayed in the light too long. The shadows are calling." As they turned to leave, the heavy silence of the diner rushed back in, but it felt different now. The air was charged, electric. I picked up the black coin, the ridges of the wolf digging into my palm. I felt like I had just signed a contract with a god of the underworld. I watched through the window as they walked toward the SUVs, the men in suits reappearing from the darkness like ghosts materializing from the mist. I thought it was over. I thought I could go back to my shift and my silent prayers. But the night was far from finished, and the wolf was just getting started. The bell chimed again, but this time it wasn't a king entering. It was a vulture. Miller burst through the door, flanked by two of his thick-necked goons. He looked frantic, his tie undone, and his eyes bloodshot. He clearly hadn't seen the black SUVs in the parking lot. He must have come through the back alley to catch me off guard. He didn't see Viktor and Sophia near the entrance, as they were partially obscured by the high-backed booths near the door. "I told you, Elena," Miller roared, slamming a meaty fist onto the counter so hard the napkin dispenser jumped. "The boss is done waiting. He wants his money now. I don't care if you have to sell your soul, your car, or your mother's life support. Give me the jar from under the floorboards, or we're taking you for a ride you won't come back from." He reached across the counter, his fingers digging into my wrist like iron claws. "What's this?" he sneered, noticing the black coin in my other hand. "Playing with play money? Give it here. Maybe it's worth a nickel." I felt a surge of cold, sharp adrenaline, but for the first time in months, I didn't feel afraid. I didn't pull away. I looked past Miller's shoulder and saw Viktor Volkov stop dead in his tracks. He didn't turn around immediately. He just stood there, perfectly still, like a statue carved from obsidian. The atmosphere in the diner changed instantly. It went from a robbery to a funeral. "Let go of me, Miller," I said, my voice steadier than it had ever been in my life. I looked him right in his bloodshot eyes. "Or what, princess?" Miller laughed, a wet, ugly sound. His goons joined in, snickering behind him. "You gonna call the cops?" "We own them." "You gonna call your sick mom?" "You're alone in the world, Elena. Nobody is coming to save a waitress." "She is not alone." A voice rumbled from the shadows. It was low, vibrationally deep, and it carried the finality of a closing casket. Miller froze. The laughter died in his throat. He slowly turned his head, his face draining of color until he looked like a sheet of gray parchment. He recognized that voice. Everyone in the underworld knew the sound of the ghost before he struck. Viktor Volkov stepped into the light, Sophia tucked safely behind his back. He looked at Miller's hand on my wrist with a look of pure, clinical disgust. This is the ultimate moment of truth. Miller just touched a woman under the ghost's protection. Do you think Viktor should show mercy because Sophia is watching, or should he remind the city why he's the boss? This is a huge debate. Let me know your side in the comments. Hit like and subscribe to see the final resolution. The silence was so thick you could have cut it with a steak knife. Miller's hand didn't just let go of my wrist. It fell away as if my skin had suddenly turned to white-hot iron. He backed up, stumbling over his own feet, hitting a table and sending a sugar shaker crashing to the floor in a spray of white crystals. "Mr. Volkov," Miller stammered, his voice 3 octaves higher, cracking like a teenager's. I didn't know. I swear on my life. She owes a debt. We didn't know she was yours. We would never have touched her." Viktor didn't yell. He didn't even raise his hand. He simply looked at one of his men who had stepped back inside, silenced pistol already drawn and held at his side. "This man is bothering the lady who saved my daughter," Viktor said quietly, his voice devoid of any emotion. "He mentions a debt. From this moment on, Miller, the only debt that exists is the one you owe me for breathing the air in this room. And I am a very demanding creditor." One of Viktor's men stepped forward, grabbing Miller by the collar and dragging him toward the door like a sack of garbage. The goons scrambled out after them, their bravado evaporated into pure, unadulterated terror. Viktor turned back to me one last time. He looked at the black coin still clutched in my hand. "The debt is settled, Elena. All of it. Your mother will receive the best care the city and my payroll can provide. Consider it a down payment on a life of kindness. Do not lose that coin. It is the only thing in this city that cannot be bought." He didn't wait for me to thank him. He didn't want my gratitude. He wanted his daughter safe. He led Sophia out into the rain, and the black sedan finally pulled away, its taillights disappearing into the neon-soaked mist of the city. I stood there alone in the midnight diner, the hum of the refrigerators the only sound left to keep me company. I looked down at the black coin, the golden wolf staring back at me. My life was no longer the simple, struggling existence I had known, but for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of the dark. I walked to the window, watching the rain wash away the tire tracks in the parking lot. I had started the night as a waitress drowning in debt, and I ended it as a woman with the shadow of a king at her back. Elena chose kindness over safety, and it changed her world forever. Was she right to accept help from a man like Viktor, or did she just trade a small debt for a much more dangerous one? I want to see your theories in the comments. Thank you for watching this journey. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell for more stories of the unexpected.